Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. The salt spray of Shipbreaker Bay stung Jon's face as he stood at the prow of the ship, his flagship cutting through the choppy waters toward the Stormland's coast. Behind him, 40 ships carried 40,000 of his most seasoned warriors, former slaves turned soldiers, Dothraki riders, sellswords who had proven their loyalty in blood, and the remnants of conquered Free City's armies. But it was not the sight of his fleet that would announce his arrival to Westeros. Above casting shadows that darkened entire sections of the bay, Balerion and Ygritte soared in lazy circles. The black dragon had grown massive, his wings spanning 100 feet. His roar capable of shaking stone. Ygritte, crimson and silver, was smaller but no less fearsome, her keen intelligence evident in how she anticipated Jon's commands. Together they were living declarations of war. His side were smaller dragons belonging to Daenerys, but majestic as a dragon should be. "My lord," Sir Marcus Blackwood approached, his weathered face grim beneath his helm. "The scouts report Griffin's Roost lies just ahead, lightly defended, as our spies indicated." Jon nodded, his gray eyes fixed on the approaching coastline. After years in Essos, the sight of Westerosi shores stirred something deep within him, a mixture of homecoming and conquest that left him unsettled. "Signal the fleet, we land at dawn." Behind him, Tormund Giantsbane spat over the rail. "About bloody time. These ships make my stomach turn worse than fermented mare's milk." The wildling had adapted well to Jon's army, his natural leadership earning respect among the diverse forces. The men are eager to feel solid ground beneath their feet. "And the dragons?" asked Ser Jorah Mormont, ever practical in his concerns. The old knight had become one of Jon's most trusted advisors, his experience in both Westeros and Essos, invaluable. Jon glanced upward as Balerion's shadow passed over them again. "They're restless. They sense we're close to something important." He paused, remembering his dreams of late, visions of fire and blood, of an iron throne that seemed to call to him across the narrow sea. "They know we're home." As the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold, Jon's fleet approached the small harbor below Griffin's Roost. The ancient seat of House Connington sat atop its rocky promontory, its red stone walls catching the early light. It was not a mighty fortress like Storm's End or Dragonstone, but it would serve Jon's purposes perfectly, a foothold in Westeros, a place to plant his banner and announce his return. The landing was swift and brutal. The handful of guards at the harbor were overwhelmed before they could sound an alarm. Jon's Dothraki screamed their war cries as they thundered up the winding path to the castle, while his disciplined infantry formed ranks on the beach. The sight of dragons overhead had already broken the will of most defenders before the first sword was drawn. Lord Ronald Connington, a young man barely past his 20th year, met Jon in the castle's great hall. He knelt without being asked, his face pale with terror and awe. "I yield Griffin's Roost to you, my lord," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously to the windows where Balerion's massive form could be seen, perched on the castle's highest tower. I have no quarrel with House Stark." Jon studied the young lord for a long moment, in his black leather and mail. With his sword at his hip and a crown of Valyrian steel upon his brow, he cut an imposing figure. The years in Essos had hardened him, carved away the last traces of the bastard boy from Winterfell. Now he was as much Aegon Targaryen as he was Jon Snow, the Dragon Wolf, conqueror of the Free Cities. And it was time to announce his true identity to the world as the true heir to Iron Throne. As a prince of Tyrians, "You may keep your lands and titles, Lord Connington," Jon said finally, his voice carrying the authority of one who had commanded armies and conquered cities. "Serve faithfully, and you will find me a just lord. Betray me," he let the threat hang in the air as Ygritte's roar echoed from outside. "I swear by the old gods and the new, I shall serve faithfully," Ronette replied quickly. "Good." Jon turned to his assembled commanders. "Tormund, establish a perimeter around the castle. I want scouts ranging 20 miles in every direction. Jorah, begin landing the rest of our forces. We'll use the harbor and the beaches to the south." As his men dispersed to their tasks, Jon climbed to the castle's highest balcony, where Balerion waited. The great dragon lowered his massive head, allowing Jon to place a hand on his warm scales. Through their bond, Jon could feel the dragon's excitement. They were in the land of their ancestors, the realm Aegon the Conqueror had claimed with fire and blood. Soon, Jon whispered to his mount, but we must be patient. This is only the beginning. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, Tyrion Lannister stood in a small council chamber, a raven's message clutched in his hands. His face, usually animated with wit or wine, was grave as he read the report for the third time. Around the table, the other council members waited in tense silence. "Well," Queen Cersei's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "What news from the Stormlands?" Tyrion set the parchment down carefully. "Dragons," he said simply. "4 of them too big, too small by all accounts, and an army that landed at Griffin's Roost 3 days ago." "Impossible. This cannot be true," Grand Maester Pissel wheezed. "How can he sail from Essos and our spies are not aware?" "Tell that to the fishermen who saw the armies and dragons flying over Shipbreaker Bay," Tyrion replied dryly, "or to Lord Connington, who has apparently bent the knee to this dragon wolf." Cersei's green eyes flashed with fury. "Dragon wolf? What manner of pretender dares use such a title?" Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine, noting how his hand trembled slightly. "According to our sources, he now calls himself Aegon Targaryen, claims to be the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Cersei seemed stunned by the implications. "Lyanna Stark?" Lord Varys spoke for the first time, his voice soft and dangerous. "How very interesting, and how very inconvenient for certain narratives we've all accepted." "It's madness," Cersei snarled. "Robert's rebellion was fought because Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna Stark. Now some pretender claims to be their son." "Madness, perhaps," Tyrion mused, swirling his wine. "But madness with dragons tends to be remarkably persuasive. Our spies report his army numbers at least 40,000, all battle-hardened veterans from his campaigns in Essos." "Essos?" Grand Maester Pissel looked confused. "What campaigns in Essos?" Varys smiled his enigmatic smile. "Oh, my dear Grand Maester, have you not heard? This dragon wolf has been quite busy across the narrow sea. Conquered several free cities, freed countless slaves, built quite the reputation as a liberator and conqueror both." Cersei stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. "I don't care if he's conquered half of Essos. He's an upstart pretender with stolen dragons. We'll crush him like we crushed all the others." "With what army?" Tyrion asked quietly. "Our forces, some are scattered, other facing Starks. The Riverlands are still recovering from the war. The north is held by the Starks, who might well support this claimant if he truly is Lyanna's son. And even if he is not, they are already at war with us, and now he holds a foothold in the Stormlands." "Then we call our banners," Cersei declared. "Send ravens to every lord in the 7 kingdoms. They swore oaths to the Iron Throne." "Oaths sworn to Robert Baratheon," Varys observed. "And many of those lords remember the Targaryens fondly, especially if this one comes with dragons and promises of justice." Tyrion drained his cup and set it down with a sharp click. "A storm is coming," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "A storm with fire and wolves. And I fear we are not prepared for its fury." In Winterfell, Robb Stark stood in his father's solar, reading the same message that had reached King's Landing. But unlike the Lannisters, his reaction was one of wonder rather than fear. Dany whispered, the name carrying years of separation and longing. "My brother, Scepter Roderick Castle, now serving as Robb's Castellan," cleared his throat. "My lord, if this is true, if Jon truly has returned here with dragons, then everything changes," Robb finished. He moved to the window, looking out over Winterfell's courtyard where his men trained. "Send ravens to White Harbor, to the Umbers, to all our bannermen. Tell them to stay ready with their forces at the camps against Lannisters, but take no action until I return with my father to command it." Robb was quiet for a long moment. "He's my brother, Roderick. Bastard or trueborn, Stark or Targaryen. He's family, and now that he has returned, we will unite our banners soon. And soon justice will be served to Starks and every other that Lancers had wronged. The other lords may not see it that way, my lord. Many fought in Robert's rebellion. They remember Arius, the Mad King." "This isn't Ares," Robb said firmly. "This is Jon. I know him. Whatever he's become, whatever he's done in Essos, I know his heart. He's not a Mad King, he's a liberator. and maybe that's exactly what the Seven Kingdoms need. He moved to his desk and began composing a message of his own. "Send this to Griffin's Roost," he instructed, "under my personal seal." The message was brief, but carried the weight of years of brotherhood. To Jon Snow, called Aegon Targaryen, Dragon Wolf and liberator of the free cities, hold fast, brother. Do not waste your strength on minor lords or petty conquests. I am here ready, as you said, and the North remembers. We await your word. Your brother in all things, Robb Stark of Winterfell. Back at Griffin's Roost, Jon stood on the castle's walls as the sun set over Shipbreaker Bay, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him of Dragonfire. Below, his army had established a proper camp, with sentries posted and supply lines secured. Ships continued to arrive throughout the day, bringing more materials from Essos. Daenerys busy sorting things out, and dragons resting. "My lord," Sarah Marcus approached with a leather satchel. "The ravens have been busy today. Messages from across the Seven Kingdoms." Jon took the satchel and began reading. Reports from King's Landing spoke of panic and hasty preparations. Lords throughout the realm were calling their banners, some in support of the Iron Throne, others remaining ominously silent. But it was the message from Winterfell that made Jon's breath catch. The simple words carried more weight than any crown or conquest. Robb still considered him family, still called him brother despite everything that had changed. Jon felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with Dragonfire. "The best," Jon replied, folding the message carefully. "The North stands with us. Even some minor houses, like Valyrians who are less but have some power, stand with us. And that makes us most powerful here, as of now." Tormund grinned, his wild beard split by a fierce smile. "The men are getting restless, wondering when we march inland." "Soon," Jon promised. "But first, we consolidate our position. More supply ships arrive daily, and I want our full strength assembled before we move. The Lancers will come for us, it's only a matter of when." "Let them come," Dario said with typical bravado. "We have dragons." "Dragons are powerful," Jon agreed, "but they're not invincible, not after the fall of Valyria. I have read the journal that I found in ruins, where I found my eggs, and it tells of the reason why dragons were so powerful. Those times, there was a dragon temple in Valyria, where stood a giant dragon-like statue. It radiated power to whole word that dragons absorbed. It is said that it was the gift that Dragon God granted to dragons, and the time Valyria was destroyed, that statue broke apart, its power lost. One of reasons that Aegon the Conqueror had 3 dragons and still needed 7 years to unite the 7 kingdoms. We must be smart, not just strong. As if summoned by his words, Balatrian landed on the castle's great tower with a sound like thunder. The massive dragon folded his wings and settled into position, his golden eyes surveying the camp below. Ykra circled overhead, her keen gaze watching the horizon for threats. "They know something's coming," Jon observed, feeling the tension in his bond with the dragons. "They can sense it in the air, the gathering storm." "What are your orders, my lord?" Marcus asked. Jon was quiet for a moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a king, though he had never claimed that title. "Send envoys to Storm's End, to the Reach, to Dorne. Let them know we come not as conquerors but as liberators. Those who join us willingly will be rewarded. Those who stand against us," he gestured toward Balerion, "will face fire and blood." Jon's gray eyes hardened. The Lannisters built their power on gold and fear. "We'll show them that dragons care nothing for gold, and that there are things more fearsome than lions." He turned to face his assembled commanders. "We are the storm, my friends. We are fire given form, ice given purpose, and we will not be denied." As night fell over Griffin's Roost, Jon stood alone with Daenerys by his side on the battlements, watching his dragons patrol the skies above his army. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new choices that would shape the fate of kingdoms. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. He was home. He was ready, and the 7 kingdoms would never be the same. The wolf had returned to Westeros, and he had brought dragons. In the depths of the Red Keep, Varys sat in his chamber, quill in hand, composing messages that would never bear his seal. The spider's web stretched across 2 continents, and tonight it trembled with the weight of momentous news. "The dragon has landed," he wrote in his careful script. "The game begins anew, and the pieces are already moving. The lions roar, but do they remember that wolves hunt in packs? And what of the dragon who learned to howl?" He sealed the message with unmarked wax, and handed it to one of his little birds. Some information was too valuable to trust to ravens. Outside his window, storm clouds gathered over King's Landing, and in the distance thunder rolled across the bay. Or perhaps it was something else entirely. The sound of wings, the promise of fire, the echo of a wolf's howl carried on the wind. The Game of Thrones had begun again, and this time the dragons had returned to play. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Old Town as Archmaester Walgrave shuffled through the restricted vaults beneath the citadel. His gnarled fingers traced along ancient tomes and scrolls, searching for the records that Grand Maester Pycelle had urgently requested. The old man's memory might have been failing in recent years, but his knowledge of the Citadel's deepest secrets remained sharp. "Where are you, you elusive thing?" he muttered, pushing aside dusty chronicles of long-dead kings. Then his fingers found it, a leather-bound tome, marked with the seal of the faith and the dragon of House Targaryen. "Ah, there you are." The record was clear, written in the careful script of a long-dead septon. "In the year of our Lord 28 after Aegon's conquest, Prince Rhaegar, Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, was wed in the sight of the Seven to Lady Lyanna Stark of Winterfell, in a ceremony conducted on the Isle of Faces before the Heart Tree, and witnessed by Sir Arthur Dane and Sir Oswell Went of the Kingsguard, as well as Howland Reed of Greywater Watch." Walgrave's weathered hands trembled as he read further. The marriage had been legitimate, sanctioned by both the old gods and the new. If this record was true, and the Citadel's archives were rarely wrong, then the boy calling himself Aegon Targaryen was no bastard pretender. He was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. "Seven preserve us," the Archmaester whispered. "The realm will burn for this truth." Within hours, ravens flew from Old Town's towers, carrying copies of the ancient record to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. The message was simple but earth-shattering. Aegon Targaryen, son of Prince Rhaegar and Lady Lyanna Stark, is trueborn and the rightful heir to Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms. In the Red Keep, King's Landing, Queen Cersei Lannister stood frozen in the throne room, the raven's message crumpled in her white-knuckled fist. Around her, the Iron Throne loomed like a jagged mountain of steel and malice, its thousand blades catching the morning light streaming through the high windows. For a moment, the only sound was the distant cry of gulls from Blackwater Bay. "Your Grace?" Grandmaster Pycelle's voice quavered with uncertainty. "The message from Old Town. I can read," Cersei snapped, her green eyes blazing with fury. She began to pace before the throne, her golden hair catching the light like spun fire. Another Targaryen heir with dragons, but this time with wolves at his back, and now they dare claim he's trueborn. Lord Tywin Lannister entered the throne room with measured steps, his presence immediately commanding attention. Even in his 60s, the Lord of Casterly Rock moved with the confidence of a man who had shaped kingdoms with his will alone. His pale green eyes took in his daughter's agitation with cool assessment. "Father," Cersei turned to him desperately. "You've heard this pretender claims legitimacy. The Citadel supports his claim." "I have heard," Tywin replied calmly, taking his place beside the throne. "And I have been thinking." "Thinking?" Cersei's voice rose to a near shriek. "We should be mobilizing every sword in the Seven Kingdoms. He has dragons, father. Dragons. And now half the realm will believe he has the right to sit this throne." Tywin studied his daughter with the same expression he might use to examine a piece on a Sivis board. "Panic is the enemy of strategy. Cersei, yes, this boy has dragons. Yes, he has an army. But dragons must eat. Armies must be fed, and even the rightful king needs gold to wage war." "What are you suggesting?" "Patience," Tywin said, the word carrying the weight of decades of political maneuvering. "He will need grain, allies, and coin. The Stormlands are poor, their harvests meager. His army of foreigners will find little welcome among the common folk. We shall bleed him without battle, block his supplies, starve his dragons, isolate his forces, turn his allies against him with promises of gold and threats of fire." Varys glided into the throne room like a shadow-given form, his soft slippers making no sound on the stone floor. The spider's smile was as enigmatic as ever, but those who knew him well might have detected a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. "Your Grace, Lord Tywin," he said with a bow, "I bring word from my little birds across the realm." "Accepta," Sero commanded. "The common folk whisper of the boy of wolf's blood and dragon fire," Varys said, his voice carrying just the right note of concern. "They say he freed slaves in Essos, that he fights for the downtrodden." Such tales spread quickly among those who have little love for current leadership. Cersei's face flushed red. "You dare." "I merely report what I hear, Your Grace," Varys interrupted smoothly. "Knowledge is power, after all. And the knowledge I bring suggests that this young man has captured the imagination of the realm in ways that mere force of arms cannot." Tywin's eyes narrowed. "What else do your birds sing, Lord Varys?" "The North stirs, my lord. Robb Stark, along his father Ned, has called his banners again, though he claims it is merely to secure his borders. The Riverlands remain loyal to House Tully. The Vale," Varys paused dramatically. "Lady Lysar remains unpredictable, but she has no love for Targaryens." "And Dorne?" Tywin asked. "Prince Doran keeps his own counsel, as always. But Doran has long memories, and they remember Ilya Martell." Cersei slammed her fist against the arm of the Iron Throne, hissing as one of the blades cut her palm. "Enough riddles! What do you counsel, father?" Tywin was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities and contingencies. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had crushed rebellions and toppled dynasties. "We consolidate our power, call in our debts, secure the loyalty of the Reach through marriage alliances, and ensure the Faith Militant remains disbanded. Let this dragon wolf exhaust himself against the Stormland's rocky soil while we prepare for a longer game. And if he marches on King's Landing, then we will be ready," Tywin replied coldly. "Dragons are powerful, but they are not invincible. Aegon the Conqueror needed 7 years to unite the 7 kingdoms, and he had 3 full-grown dragons. This boy has 2 and a handful of foreign sellswords." Varys cleared his throat delicately. "Forgive me, my lord, but my sources suggest he has 4 dragons now. 2 large enough to ride, and 2 smaller ones belonging to a young woman who travels with him." The silence that followed was deafening. Cersei's face went pale, while Tywin's expression remained carved from stone. "4 dragons," Tywin repeated slowly. "And who is this young woman?" "Daenerys Targaryen, my lord, the last daughter of Aerys the Mad King. In Winterfell, Sansa Stark sat in her solar, her needle moving in precise, practiced strokes as she embroidered a winter rose onto a silk handkerchief. The afternoon light streaming through the windows caught the silver thread, making it shimmer like frost, but her mind was far from her needlework. The whispers had reached Winterfell 3 days ago, carried by merchants and traveling septons, by hedge knights and wandering singers. Jon had returned to Westeros. Jon, her bastard brother who had always been kind to her, who had given her a carved wooden doll for her name day when they were children, had come back with dragons and an army. "My lady," Old Nan's voice interrupted her thoughts. The ancient woman shuffled into the solar, her gnarled hands carrying a tray of lemon cakes and tea. "You've been sitting here for hours. You need to eat something." "I'm not hungry," Sansa replied, not looking up from her embroidery. "Old Nan, have you heard about Jon? About his mother?" Old Nan was quiet for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. "I knew your Aunt Lyanna," she said finally. "Beautiful as a winter rose, fierce as a she-wolf. If the boy is her son, then he has the blood of winter and wolves in his veins. No matter what dragon fire burns there too. Truth is a strange thing, child. It has a way of revealing itself, when the time is right." Old Nan moved to the window, looking out over Winterfell's courtyard, where Robb's men trained with sword and spear. Sansa set down her needle and joined Old Nan at the window. Below, she could see Arya dodging between the training men, her wooden sword in hand as she practiced the water-dancing Syrio Forel had taught her in King's Landing. Jon has saved her and Arya after they captured her father, with her in the custody of Cersei and Arya. Lost in King's Landing, his men found and freed both, taking them safely to Winterfell, and she was grateful for it. "I miss him," Sansa admitted. "Jon, I wasn't always kind to him when we were children. I thought he was just a bastard who didn't belong with the rest of us. But he was always good to me, even when I was cruel. Even I hated him for his bastardy." Old Nan admitted. But truth always clears out these things. But even at that time, I knew a thing deep in my hatred, that the boy always had a good heart, old Nan agreed. Whatever he's become, wherever he's been, that doesn't change. A commotion in the courtyard below caught their attention. Arya had apparently grown bored with her practice, and was now attempting to climb the walls of the tower, much to the alarm of the guards below. That girl, Sansa sighed. She never listens. She has wolf's blood, old Nan chuckled. Just like your Aunt Lyanna did. Meanwhile, in the Godswood, Arya Stark crouched behind the massive trunk of the heart tree, her gray eyes wide with concentration as she listened to the hushed conversation between her brother Robb, father, and Maester Luwin. She had been practicing her stealth, trying to move as silently as a cat, though she didn't fully understand what that meant yet. The message from Jon arrived this morning, Robb was saying, his voice tight with emotion. He's established himself at Griffin's Roost, and is calling for a meeting of the great houses. The political implications are staggering, Luwin agreed. He is legitimate. He has a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than any living person. Jon has dragons, Robb replied simply. And he has the loyalty of men who chose to follow him, not men who were bought with gold or cowed by fear. Arya's heart raced at the mention of dragons. Jon had dragons and she had seen them while his visit to Winterfell, when dragons were little, her mind filled with images of great winged beasts, breathing fire, of her brother riding through the sky like a hero from the songs. I have to see him, she whispered to herself, then clapped a hand over her mouth, hoping the men hadn't heard. But Robb's keen ears had caught the sound. Who's there? He called out, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Arya considered running, but she knew Robb would catch her eventually. Instead, she stepped out from behind the heart tree, her chin raised defiantly. Arya, Robb sighed, though there was fondness in his voice. How long have you been listening? Long enough, she replied, moving closer to her brother and the maester. Is it true? Has Jon really arrived? Are his dragons very big now? Did he find more dragons? Robb and Luwin exchanged glances. Finally, Robb nodded. According to the reports, yes, and there are 4 of them. 4. Arya's eyes went wide. Can I see them? When Jon comes north, can I meet the dragons?
If Jon comes north, Robb corrected gently.
And even if he does, dragons are not just pets, Arya. They're creatures of fire and death. I'm not afraid, Arya declared, and Robb believed her. His little sister had never been afraid of anything, not even when she should be. I know you're not, he said, reaching out to ruffle her hair. But promise me you'll be careful. Arya nodded solemnly, but her mind was already racing with plans. If Jon was truly back, then maybe things could be different. Maybe they could win against the Lannisters now. Maybe they could make the realm a better place. Robb, she said suddenly, when you write back to Jon, tell him I'm proud of him. Tell him I always knew he was meant for something great. Robb smiled, and for a moment he looked like the boy who used to chase Arya through Winterfell's halls, not the young lord who now bore the weight of the North on his shoulders. I will, he promised. I'll tell him exactly that. Beyond the wall, a memory. Some years earlier, Tormund Giantsbane stood atop the wall, his wild red beard whipping in the bitter wind as he gazed out at the lands beyond. The Night's Watch had grown complacent, their numbers dwindling, their vigilance waning. It was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. Har, he laughed, turning to the 1,000 wildlings who had followed him on this desperate gambit. Look at them, sleeping like babes in their beds while we freeze our arses off out here. The plan had been months in the making. While Mance Rayder gathered the great host of wildlings for his assault on the wall, Tormund had convinced a smaller group to attempt a different approach. They would scale the wall at its weakest point, overwhelm the skeleton crew at Eastwatch by the Sea, and steal ships to carry them across the narrow sea. Why run to Essos? One of his men had asked. Why not stay and fight with Mance? Because I've seen what's coming, Tormund had replied grimly. The dead walk, and winter is coming with them. The wall won't hold forever, and when it falls, I want my people far from here. The assault on Eastwatch had been swift and brutal. The few Night's Watch brothers stationed there had fought bravely, but were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Tormund had felt a pang of regret as he looked upon their bodies. They had been doing their duty, protecting the realm from wildlings like him. But survival demanded hard choices. They had taken 3 ships and sailed east, leaving behind the only home they had ever known. The crossing had been treacherous, with storms and seasickness claiming dozens of lives, but they had made it to Brevos, then to Pentos, selling their services as sellswords and mercenaries. It was in Pentos that Tormund had heard whispers of the wolf, a young man with stark features. The boy had been walking through Pentos's markets with a red-haired girl. He knew as he greeted one of her people who was assigned in Red Keep, but her news got lost, some time ago, and an older man in red robes.
Jon Snow,
Tormund had whispered, recognizing the face despite the years that had passed. He had seen the boy at Winterfell once, during a visit to negotiate with Ned Stark, about wildling raids. The bastard had grown into a man, but those gray eyes were unmistakable. Their first meeting had been tense. Jon had been suspicious of the wildling who claimed to know him, and Tormund had been uncertain how to approach the boy who now commanded dragons. But when Jon learned of Tormund's escape from beyond the wall, of his desperate flight to save his people from the coming darkness, something had shifted between them. "You left everything behind to save them," Jon had said, studying Tormund with those penetrating gray eyes. "That takes courage." "Courage or madness? Hard to tell the difference sometimes," Tormund had replied. From that moment, a friendship had been born. And when he heard Ygritte had died in Jon's arms, Tormund had been there to help his friend through the darkest period of his life. He had watched Jon channel his grief into righteous fury, seen him transform from a idealistic young man into a hardened conqueror who would reshape the world through fire and blood. When Jon began his campaigns against the slave cities, Tormund and his wildlings had fought beside him. They had proven themselves in battle after battle, earning the respect of Jon's diverse army through blood and steel. Present-day Griffin's Roost. Tormund stood on the battlements of Griffin's Roost, watching Jon train with his sword in the courtyard below. The years had changed them both. Jon now bore the bearing of a king, while Tormund's red beard had gained streaks of gray. But their friendship remained as strong as ever. Even if he is still afraid of the walking dead, he knows after years of travel that even if he escapes to Essos, he will only buy some time if they come. So now he has decided to be with Jon's side and fight together, just like in the ancient history. Still brooding like a proper crow, Tormund muttered to himself, then called down to the courtyard. "Oi, your grace, stop dancing around like a Southron lord and fight like a man." Jon looked up and grinned, the expression transforming his face from stern ruler to the young man Tormund remembered. "Come down here and say that, old man." Old man is it?" Tormund began making his way down to the courtyard, his hand on his sword hilt. "I'll show you, old you dragon-riding bastard." Their sparring match drew a crowd of soldiers, both Jon's veterans from Essos and the newer recruits from Westeros. The two men circled each other warily, Jon with his Valyrian steel blade, Longclaw, Tormund with his massive two-handed sword. "Remember when you could barely hold a sword without cutting yourself?" Tormund taunted, launching a series of powerful strikes that Jon parried with fluid grace. "I remember you falling off your horse the first time you saw Balerion." Jon countered, riposting with a thrust that Tormund barely deflected. Their banter continued as they fought, each man pushing the other to his limits. It was more than just training, it was a reaffirmation of their bond. A reminder that despite all the titles and responsibilities, they were still the same men who had fought side by side in the slave cities of Essos. Finally, both men stepped back, breathing heavily, but grinning. "Not bad for a boy," Tormund admitted grudgingly. "Not bad for a wildling," Jon replied, clasping his friend's forearm in the traditional warrior's grip. As they walked back toward the castle, Tormund's expression grew serious. "Jon lad, I need to ask you something. When we march north, and we will march north eventually, what happens to my people, the wildlings who followed me across the sea?" Jon was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "They're your people, Tormund, but they're also my people now. Anyone who fights under my banner, who swears to protect the innocent and defend the realm, has a place in the kingdom I'm building. Even wildlings. Especially wildlings," Jon said firmly. "The old divisions, the old hatreds, they end with us. North of the wall, south of the wall, it doesn't matter. We're all just people trying to survive in a harsh world." Tormund nodded slowly. It was the answer he had hoped for, but hearing it confirmed still brought him relief. "Har, you really have changed, Jon Snow. The boy I met in Pentos first time never would have said something like that." "The boy you met in Pentos hadn't seen what I've seen. He only heard of wildlings attacking, burning and raping," Jon replied quietly. Hadn't lost what I've lost, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. As they entered the castle, a commotion in the courtyard caught their attention. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered with sweat and his clothes stained with road dust. He bore the direwolf banner of House Stark. "A message from Winterfell, Your Grace," the rider gasped, dismounting and offering Jon a sealed letter. Jon broke the seal with trembling fingers, his heart racing as he read Robb's words. But it wasn't just a letter. Wrapped within the parchment was something that made Jon's mood instantly lighten up. A collar. A simple leather collar with a small iron nameplate that read Ghost. "My lord?" Tormund asked, noting the sudden change in Jon's expression. Jon looked up, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "My father, Ned Stark, sent me a gift." "What kind of gift?" Before Jon could answer, a howl echoed across Griffin's roost. Long, mournful, and unmistakably the call of a direwolf. In the distance, a white shape bounded across the hills, moving with supernatural speed toward the castle. "Ghost," Jon whispered, and then louder, with joy and wonder in his voice. "Ghost." The great white direwolf burst into the courtyard like a force of nature, his red eyes fixed on Jon with unmistakable intelligence and love. He was massive now, nearly the size of a small horse, his white fur pristine despite his long journey. Jon dropped to his knees as Ghost reached him, burying his face in the direwolf's thick fur as the animal whined and nuzzled against him. For a moment, the dragon wolf, conqueror of cities and commander of dragons, was just a young man with his beloved companion. Tormund watched all this with a smile, remembering his own connection to the wild creatures of the far north. "Hor, now that's a proper love. Though I have to ask, how's your wolf getting along with your dragons?" As if summoned by his words, Barion's shadow passed overhead, the great black dragons circling the castle in lazy loops. Ghost looked up at the sky, his red eyes tracking the dragon's movement, but showed no fear, only curiosity. "I think they're managing quite well," Jon said, standing and keeping one hand on Ghost's head. "They're both part of who I am now. The wolf and the dragon, ice and fire." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, truly was the bridge between two worlds, two legacies, two destinies. And as the sun set over Griffin's roost, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, it seemed as though the very heavens were acknowledging the return of the rightful king. In King's Landing, the lions might roar their defiance. In Old Town, maesters might debate the legitimacy of ancient records. But here, in this moment, with dragons in the sky and a dire wolf at his side, Jon knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The Game of Thrones had begun anew, and this time, the wolves and dragons would play to win. The Great Hall of Griffin's Roost had seen many councils in its long history, but none quite like this. Ancient Valyrian banners hung alongside the dire wolf of House Stark, while outside, dragons cast shadows over the courtyard where northern soldiers mingled with former slaves turned warriors. The very stones seemed to hum with the weight of destiny. Jon Snow, no longer a bastard, no longer just the king in the Essos, but something even greater, sat at the head of the carved table, his hand resting on the pommel of Longclaw. To his right sat Daenerys Targaryen, her silver-gold hair catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. The Mother of Dragons had traded her elaborate Milanese gowns for practical leather and wool, though she still wore the three-headed dragon pin at her throat. Their fingers were intertwined beneath the table, a small intimacy in the midst of great matters of war. The council chamber buzzed with tension as lords, knights, and advisors debated their next move. Maps covered the table, marked with colored pins showing troop movements, supply lines, and enemy positions. Ravens had brought word throughout the night, some bearing good news, others troubling reports from across the Seven Kingdoms. "Your Grace," Ser Jorah Mormont began, his weathered face grave as he leaned forward. The old knight's voice carried the weight of decades of warfare and exile. "Every moment we delay gives Cersei Lannister time to consolidate her power. King's Landing lies before us like a ripe fruit, ready for plucking. We have grown dragons, you have proven yourself in battle, and our combined forces number nearly 40,000 strong. We should march on the capital immediately." Jorah's scarred hands traced the route on the map, his finger following the king's road north. "Strike fast. Strike hard. Take the Iron Throne before she can rally more support from the remaining loyalist houses. The longer we wait, the more time she has to turn the people against us with her lies and propaganda. Tormund, giant spine, snorted, his wild red beard bristling with indignation. Bah! You southern lords in your castles! The Wilden leader's massive frame dominated his chair as he gestured dismissively. Jon Snow, you've got family up north. Real family. Your father Eddard Stark lives, and your brother Robb commands armies currently at hold in the Riverlands. The North remembers, and they're waiting for their king to come home. The wildling's blue eyes blazed with fervor as he continued. Forget this southern throne of swords. Unite with your pack first. Eddard Stark's honor is known throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Having him at your side would legitimize your claim more than any dragon ever could. And young Robb, they say he's never lost a battle. Together, the Starks would be unstoppable. Tormund slammed his fist on the table, making the wine cups jump. Winter is coming. Jon Snow, and winter is when wolves hunt together. Your sisters are safe in Winterfell. Your father and brother fight for justice in the south. This is the time for the pack to reunite, not to go chasing after some chair made of melted swords. Thoros of Myr, his red robes rustling as he shifted in his seat, raised a cautionary hand. The Red Priest's voice carried the weight of visions seen in flames. My lords, my king, my would-be queen, he says, while some amusement causing Daenerys to lower her head shyly. I have gazed into the fires, and they show me dangers in haste. His eyes, still sharp despite his years, moved between Jon and Daenerys. The Lord of Light has brought you both far, but even he counsels wisdom over rashness. The priest's scarred hands gestured to the map spread before them. Our position here in the Stormlands is strong, but it is not yet secure. Storm's End still holds for several minor houses that remain uncommitted. If we march north or west now, we leave our rear exposed to Lannister counterattacks. Consolidate what we have won, secure our supply lines, ensure the loyalty of the Stormlords completely. Thoros' voice took on an almost prophetic tone. The flames show me a great victory, but only if we do not overextend ourselves. A wolf that hunts alone may catch a rabbit, but a pack that hunts together can bring down a stag. Build your strength here first, then strike with overwhelming force. The debate continued for hours, voices rising and falling like the tide. Lords Connington and Selmy offered their own counsel. Jon listened to each voice, weighing their words carefully. The crown felt heavy on his brow, not the physical weight, for he wore no crown in council, but the metaphorical burden of command. Every decision could mean life or death for thousands, victory or defeat for their cause. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Jon rose from his chair. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to their king. Daenerys squeezed his hand gently before releasing it, her violet eyes offering silent support. I have heard your counsel, and I value each voice in this room, Jon began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Ser Jorah, your loyalty to our cause is unquestioned, and your desire for swift action honors the warrior in you. Tormund, your words about family and pack strike deep. The North is indeed my home, and my heart yearns to see it again. Jon's gray eyes moved to the Red Priest. And Thoros, your wisdom has guided us well before. The Lord of Light has indeed blessed our union and our cause, but he also grants us the intelligence to plan wisely. The young king moved to stand behind his chair, his hands gripping its back. Here is my decision. We will not march immediately on King's Landing, nor will we race north to Winterfell. Instead, we will first secure the Stormlands completely. Storm's End must fall, and every house in this region must declare for us or face the consequences. Dawn's voice grew stronger, more commanding. The Stormlands were the seat of Targaryen power for generations before Aegon's conquest. They will be our base of operations, our stronghold from which we can strike in any direction. Once this region is truly ours, not just conquered but secured, then we will have the luxury of choosing our next move from a position of unassailable strength. He looked directly at Tormund. My friend, I have not forgotten my family in the north. Word will be sent to my father and brother, coordinating our efforts. When we do march, it will be with such overwhelming force that no enemy can stand against us. Then to Jorah and Ser Jorah, when we do take King's Landing, it will not be as desperate conquerors racing against time, but as rightful rulers claiming what is ours by right, with the full support of a united realm behind us. The decision made, the council began to disperse, but not before detailed planning sessions were arranged for the morrow. Supply lines needed to be established, siege engines constructed for the assault on Storm's End, and diplomatic overtures made to wavering houses. Later that afternoon, as the council members attended to their various duties, Jon and Daenerys walked together through the grounds of Griffin's Roost. The castle, ancient and proud, showed signs of recent renovation. Jon's men had worked tirelessly to repair damage from years of neglect and recent battles. "It's beautiful," Daenerys said softly, her hand tucked into the crook of Jon's arm as they climbed the steps to the castle's highest tower. Jon smiled, remembering his first glimpse of the castle. Griffin's Roost was built to last. These stones have weathered 1,000 storms, seen the rise and fall of kings and queens. There's something permanent about it. They reached the tower's peak, where a small garden had been planted centuries ago. Despite the approaching winter, some hardy flowers still bloomed, their petals bright against the gray stone. From here they could see for miles in every direction, the narrow sea to the east, the forests and hills of the Stormlands, stretching west and south. "Tell me about this place," Daenerys said, settling onto a stone bench beside a fountain that tinkled softly in the afternoon air. "I know so little of Westeros beyond what I learned from books and Vysteros's mad ravings." Jon sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Griffin's Roost was the seat of House Connington for centuries. They were loyal bannermen to your family, fought for your father during Robert's rebellion. When they lost, Robert stripped them of their lands and titles, sent Jon Connington into exile. His voice grew thoughtful. "It's strange to think about if your father had won that war. If things had been different, you might have grown up here. You might have visited this very garden as a child." Daenerys was quiet for a long moment, her violet eyes distant. "I used to dream about Westeros when I was little," she said finally. "Viserys would tell me stories about the Red Keep, about Dragonstone, about the great castles of our ancestors, but his stories were always about power, about what was taken from us, what we deserve to reclaim." She turned to face Jon, her expression soft. "This is the first time I've been able to simply appreciate the beauty of it, to see it not as something to be conquered, but as something to be cherished." Jon reached out, tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, still new enough to make his heart race slightly. "These lands were once your houses," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken to her the night before. "Now they are ours, not just to rule, but to protect, to make better than they were before." "Ours," Daenerys repeated, the word carrying weight. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. "I like the sound of that." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as they sat together in comfortable silence. In the distance they could hear the sounds of the castle coming to life, soldiers training in the courtyard, servants preparing the evening meal, the occasional roar of a dragon from the fields beyond the walls. "Jon," Daenerys said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper, "that night when you kissed me." Jon felt heat rise in his cheeks. Their first kiss had been spontaneous, born of relief and joy. It had happened in the privacy of his chambers. The memory of it, her lips soft against his, the way she'd melted into his arms, had occupied his thoughts ever since. "I've been thinking about it too," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this is all new, complicated. We're allies, partners in this war, but we're also more than that," Daenerys finished, her hand finding his. "We are more than that, aren't we?" Jon nodded, unable to find words for the feelings that had been growing between them over the weeks of shared struggle and triumph. It had started as mutual respect, evolved into deep friendship, and now, "I don't want to rush anything," he said carefully. "There's so much at stake, so many people depending on us. But Dany, what I feel for you..." She silenced him with a gentle finger pressed to his lips. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too. This connection between us, it's not just political alliance, it's something real, something precious." Daenerys moved closer on the bench, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. "In Essos, I learned how to be a queen before I learned to be a woman. But I never allowed myself to simply feel, to want something for myself, rather than my brother." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "But with you, Jon Snow, I find myself wanting things I never dared dream of. Not just the Iron Throne, not just justice for my family, but happiness. Love, a future that's about more than just duty and conquest." Jon's heart hammered against his ribs as he looked into her eyes. I want that too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. More than I've ever wanted anything. But Dini, I need you to know, the path I walk is unclear, but I'm still learning how to be a king, how to be worthy of someone like you. Daenerys smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. We'll learn together, she said simply. Kings and queens, partners in war and in peace, and perhaps, something even more precious than that. This time, when their lips met, it was not born of spontaneous relief, but of deliberate choice. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as they lost themselves in the moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. The council will be expecting us for dinner soon, Jon said reluctantly, though he made no move to pull away. Let them wait, Daenerys murmured, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. For once, let the king and the dragon queen be just Jon and Daenerys, sitting in a garden, watching the sunset. And so they did, holding each other close, as the sky turned from blue to purple to deep black, stars beginning to twinkle overhead. Tomorrow would bring war councils and battle plans, ravens carrying news from across the Seven Kingdoms. But tonight, in the quiet peace of Griffin's Roost, they were simply two people who had found something worth fighting for beyond crowns and thrones. They had found each other. In the distance, Drogon's roar echoed across the countryside, a sound that might have once struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. But here, in this moment, it sounded almost like a song of joy, a dragon's blessing on the union of ice and fire that would reshape the world. The war for the Seven Kingdoms would continue, but it would be fought by two hearts beating as one, two souls united in purpose and in love. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would make all the difference. The ancient seat of House Baratheon had weathered many storms in its 1,000-year history, but none quite like the one approaching on this gray morning. Storm's End rose from the cliffs like a great stone fist thrust toward the heavens, its massive curtain wall, said to be the strongest fortification in all the Seven Kingdoms, gleaming wet with morning dew and sea spray. From his position atop a nearby hill, Jon Snow studied the fortress that had defied dragons, armies, and sieges for centuries. The morning mist clung to the battlements, but he could make out the banners of House Baratheon, the crowned stag. A small garrison, perhaps 300 men at most, but positioned behind walls that had never fallen to direct assault. Magnificent, isn't it? Daenerys said softly, her voice carrying a note of wonder, as she joined him at the edge of their command pavilion. She wore practical leather armor now, her silver hair braided back in the Dothraki fashion, though a delicate crown of twisted silver and rubies still marked her royal status. Some of the men had begun calling her Queen Daenerys, openly, and she had not corrected them. Jon nodded, his gray eyes tracing the massive walls. The builders knew their craft. Durin God's Grief raised the first castle here, they say, and each lord since has added to its strength. It's said that Storm's End has never fallen to siege or storm. Until today, Daenerys replied, her violet eyes finding his. There was something electric in the air between them, the charged atmosphere of two people, newly in love, standing on the precipice of battle together. Their romance was still fresh, still tentative in some ways, but growing stronger with each passing day. Jon reached out, his gloved hand covering hers where it rested on the wooden railing. Are you ready for this? She smiled, the expression both tender and fierce. With you beside me, I'm ready for anything. The sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. Ser Jorah Mormont approached, his armor gleaming in the morning light, followed by some others, and Lord Jon Connington. Behind them came the other members of their war council, faces grim with the weight of the day ahead. Your Grace, Your Majesty, Jorah said, inclining his head to both Jon and Daenerys. The men are in position, siege engines ready, though I suspect we won't need them long. One of the men spoke. I know the commander of that garrison, Ser Cortine Penrose. A good man, honorable, but stubborn as a mule. He'll not surrender easily, even facing dragons. Then we'll have to convince him, Jon said quietly. I want to minimize bloodshed where possible. These are not our enemies by choice. They serve their lords as honor demands. Lord Connington, his weathered face bearing the scars of years in exile, spoke up. Storm's End was my family's overlord for generations. Many of those men inside served under my father, my grandfather. If there's a way to take the castle without slaughter. There is, Daenerys said, her voice carrying quiet confidence. She looked up at the sky, where 4 dark shapes circled high above the clouds. Balladorian grows restless. He senses battle coming. Within the walls of Storm's End, Davos Seaworth pressed himself against a narrow window in the castle's eastern tower, his weathered hands gripping the stone sill as he peered out at the army spreading across the fields below. The Onion Knight's heart hammered in his chest as he counted banners, estimated numbers, and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. 40,000 men, maybe more, he thought grimly. And dragons. Sweet mother, have mercy. There are dragons. Davos had arrived at Storm's End 3 days ago, carrying sealed orders from Stannis Baratheon. His king, though Davos sometimes wondered if Stannis truly was that anymore, had sent him to assess the situation in the Stormlands, to determine if Storm's End could hold against whatever forces Jon Snow might bring to bear. The answer, Davos realized with growing dread, was a resounding no. Sir Davos, the voice belonged to Ser Courtenay Penrose, the castle's commander. The Grey Knight approached with measured steps, his own face grave, as he joined Davos at the window. What do you make of it? I make it that we're about to face the largest army seen in the Stormlands since Robert's Rebellion, Davos replied honestly, and that's before we account for the dragons. Ser Courtenay was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the banners flying over the enemy camp. The boy calls himself king now, Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell. Now again Targaryen king in the Essos and heir to Iron Throne. And beside him Daenerys Targaryen, the daughter of Mad King. Aye, Davos said softly. And from what I hear, they've been winning battles from Essos to here. The older knight's jaw tightened. I've held this castle for King Stannis, as honor demands. He shook his head. What has he done for the Stormlands until now? What has he done for any of us? Before Davos could respond, a horn sounded from the battlements. Both men rushed to the window, pressing against the stone to see what was happening below. A small party had ridden out from the enemy camp, approaching under a banner of parley. At its head rode a young man with dark hair and gray eyes, his bearing noble. Beside him rode the silver-haired queen, her beauty visible even at this distance. They want to talk, Ser Courtenay observed. Aye, Davos agreed. Question is, are we willing to listen? The parley took place on the field before Storm's End's main gate, within shouting distance of the walls, but far enough out to avoid any potential treachery. Jon rode out with a small escort. Daenerys at his side, Ser Jorah and others flanking them, with a dozen guards in Stark and Targaryen colors. Ser Courtenay Penrose met them at the designated spot, accompanied by his own small retinue. The older knight's face was weathered by years of service, his hair gray but his bearing still proud. He studied Jon with sharp eyes, taking the measure of the young king who had come to claim his castle. Your Grace, Ser Courtenay said formally, inclining his head slightly. I am Ser Courtenay Penrose, Castellan of Storm's End in the name of King Stannis of House Baratheon, first of his name. Ser Courtenay, Jon replied, his voice respectful, but firm. I am Jon Snow, and Aegon Targaryen, king in the Essos, and rightful heir to the Iron Throne. This is Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The introduction hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ser Courtenay's eyes moved between Jon and Daenerys, clearly trying to reconcile what he saw with what he had heard. You come with a great host, the Castellan observed, and with dragons. I assume you mean to take my castle. I do, Jon said simply, but I would prefer to take it without unnecessary bloodshed. You are an honorable man, Ser Courtenay. Your reputation precedes you. I have no quarrel with you personally, nor with the men under your command. Daenerys spoke for the first time, her voice carrying across the field with surprising strength. The men of the Stormlands have suffered under Lannister rule, and now Stannis' taxes raised, harvests seized, young men pressed into service for wars they never chose. We offer something different. And what is that, Your Grace? Ser Courtenay asked, his tone carefully neutral. Justice, Jon replied, fair rule, protection for the small folk, and respect for the nobility, who serve with honor. The Stormlands were the seat of Targaryen power for generations before Aegon's conquest. They can be again, not as conquered territory, but as valued allies. The Castellan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving to the massive army spread across the fields behind Jon and Daenerys. Finally he spoke. I swore an oath to serve the rightful king. The question becomes, who is that rightful king? Look around you, Jon said quietly. Look at the men who follow us. Us usse men who chose to march Westeros and towards the depths of winter. Former slaves who chose freedom over chains. Stormlanders who have already declared for our cause. Does that sound like the following of pretenders? And look above you, Daenerys added, her voice taking on an almost mystical quality. High overhead, Balerion circled, his massive wings casting shadows on the ground below. The dragons have returned to Westeros. Fire and blood, yes, but also justice and protection for those who deserve it. Sarah Courtenay looked up at the great black dragon, his face pale but resolute. If I surrender this castle, what becomes of my men? What becomes of the small folk who have sheltered here? Your men will be offered the chance to join our cause or return to their homes with honor, Jon said immediately. Any who wish to take the Black and join the Night's Watch will be given safe passage north, and any who wants to return to Stannis will be given safe passage and necessary supplies. The small folk will be protected and treated fairly. You have my word on this. And you, Sir Courtenay? Daenerys asked. What would you choose for yourself? The older knight studied both of them for a long moment. I am an old man, your graces. I have served faithfully all my life. But I am tired of serving kings who care nothing for their people. If you truly mean what you say about justice and protection. We do, Jon said firmly. I give you my word as a Stark and as a king. Sir Courtenay nodded slowly. Then I will open the gates. But I ask one thing. Let me address my men first. Let them hear from my own lips why I make this choice. They deserve that much. Granted, Jon agreed immediately. Take whatever time you need. An hour later, the great gates of Storm's End groaned open for the first time in months. Septon Courtenay, Penrose, stood in the courtyard, his men assembled before him in neat ranks. From his position near the gates, Davos watched as the castellan addressed his garrison. Men of Storm's End, Sarah Courtenay began, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. For months we have held these walls in the name of King Stannis. We have done our duty as honor demanded. But I have spoken with Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen, and I believe the time has come to choose a new path. Murmurs rippled through the assembled soldiers, but discipline held them in formation. They offer us terms of honor, the castellan continued. Those who wish to join their cause will be welcomed. Those who wish to return home may do so with full pardons. Those who wish to take the Black will be given safe passage to the wall, and those who wants to go back to King Stannis will be given allowance. No man will be forced to serve against his conscience. Davos found himself nodding unconsciously. Fair terms. More than fair. I have decided to open the gates and surrender Storm's End, Sarah Courtenay announced. Not in defeat, but in hope. Hope for a better future for the Stormlands, for all the Seven Kingdoms. These are not conquerors come to pillage and burn. They are liberators come to restore justice. The gates swung wide, and Jon Snow rode into Storm's End at the head of a small column. Davos pressed closer, wanting to see this king who had somehow united half the world under his banner. What he saw surprised him. Jon Snow was younger than expected, perhaps 20 years old, with the dark hair and gray eyes of House Stark. But there was something in his bearing, something in the way he carried himself, that spoke of authority earned rather than inherited. He rode not like a conqueror entering a defeated city, but like a king coming home. Beside him rode the Daenerys Targaryen, and Davos felt his breath catch. Daenerys Targaryen was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was power in her, a presence that seemed to make the very air shimmer around her. When she looked at Jon Snow, Davos saw something that made his heart ache with memory. The same look his dear wife had given him on their wedding day. They love each other, he realized. This isn't just a political alliance. They're in love. Jon dismounted in the courtyard, his movements graceful and sure. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the space. Men of Storm's End, he began. I thank you for your service to this castle and to the realm. You have shown honor and courage in defending your home. Now I ask you to consider serving a greater cause. Not just the defense of one castle, but the protection of all the innocent, the restoration of justice to the Seven Kingdoms. A young soldier near the front of the formation stepped forward. Your Grace, what of our families? Our homes? Any man who wishes to return home may do so immediately, Jon replied without hesitation. You will be given supplies for the journey and a purse of silver to help you rebuild your lives. Those who choose to stay and serve will be paid fair wages and treated with the respect due to soldiers of honor. An older soldier, a sergeant by his stripes, spoke up. And what of looters? Your Grace, what of those who would prey on the innocent? Jon's expression hardened slightly. Any man who harms innocents, who steals from the small folk, who dishonors himself or this army will face swift justice. I will not tolerate rapists, murderers, or thieves in my service. Davos found himself impressed, despite himself. The young king spoke with conviction, with genuine concern for the welfare of common soldiers and civilians alike. It was so different from the cold pragmatism of Stannis, so different from the cruel caprice of Joffrey or the drunken negligence of Robert. I offer you a choice, Jon continued, his voice growing stronger. Serve with honor in an army that fights for justice, or return to your homes with my blessing and my thanks. But choose freely, without coercion or fear. Over the next hour, Davos watched as the soldiers of Storm's End made their decisions. To his surprise, nearly 3/4 chose to join Jon's army. They were drawn not just by the promise of fair treatment and regular pay, but by something else. Hope. Hope that their service might actually mean something, that they might be part of something greater than just another lord's ambition. Those who chose to leave were given supplies and coin as promised, their departure marked by respectful farewells from their former comrades. Those who chose to stay were immediately integrated into Jon's forces, their experience and local knowledge valued and respected. But it was what happened next that truly opened Davos's eyes to the character of this bastard king. A commotion near the castle's main hall drew everyone's attention. A group of Jon's soldiers had discovered several men attempting to steal from the castle's stores, not food or necessities, but silver plate and jewelry from the lord's chambers. The would-be thieves were dragged before Jon, their hands bound, their faces pale with fear. Davos recognized them as sellswords who had joined the army recently, men drawn by the promise of loot rather than any higher calling. Your Grace, the sergeant who had captured them reported, we found these men breaking into the Lord's chambers, filling sacks with silver and gold. Jon's face was stone as he looked at the prisoners. You were told the rules when you joined this army. No looting, no theft, no harm to innocents. Did you think those were merely suggestions? One of the thieves, a scarred man with shifty eyes, tried to speak. Your Grace, we thought, the castle surrendered. We thought it was our right. You're right. Jon's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly across the courtyard. Your right to steal from people who surrendered honorably. Your right to dishonor this army and everything we stand for. The man fell silent, recognizing the danger in the king's tone. Jon turned to address the assembled crowd, soldiers, servants, small folk who had gathered to witness this moment of justice. Let this be clear to all who serve in this army. We are not bandits or raiders. We do not take what is not freely given. We do not prey upon the innocent or the defenseless. He looked back at the prisoners. You have dishonored yourselves in this cause. The penalty for theft in wartime is death. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Jon held up a hand for silence. However, he continued, I am not without mercy. You will be stripped of your weapons and armor, given a day's food and water, and escorted beyond our lines. You are banished from this army forever. If you are found within 10 leagues of our forces again, the sentence of death will be carried out immediately. The relief on the thieves' faces was palpable, but Jon wasn't finished. The silver and gold you attempted to steal will be distributed among the servants and small folk of this castle, as compensation for the fear and disruption you have caused them. This pronouncement brought murmurs of approval from the crowd. Davos found himself nodding along with the rest. Justice tempered with mercy, punishment that fits the crime. This is how a true king should rule. As the former thieves were led away, stripped of their weapons and escorted beyond the castle walls, Jon turned his attention to more pressing matters. The integration of Storm's End's garrison into his army, the establishment of supply lines, the planning of their next moves. But Davos had seen enough. As the crowd began to disperse, he made his way through the castle's corridors, his mind racing with implications. For months, he had served Stannis Baratheon with loyalty born of gratitude and respect. Stannis had made him a knight, had raised him from smuggler to lord, had given him purpose and honor, but Stannis had also grown harder, colder, more willing to embrace dark powers and cruel methods in pursuit of his claim. But here was a different kind of king. Jon Snow commanded through inspiration rather than fear, through justice rather than terror. His followers served him not because they feared the consequences of refusal, but because they believed in what he represented. And the Dragon Queen beside him, Davos had expected a conqueror, a foreign invader come to burn and pillage. Instead, he saw a woman who looked at the people of Westeros with genuine concern, who spoke of protection and justice with the same fervor others reserved for gold and glory. They love each other, he thought again, remembering the way their eyes met during the parley, the way they stood close together without seeming to realize it. And more than that, they love their people, both of them. As evening fell over Storm's End, Davos found himself in the castle's godswood, a small grove of ancient trees that had somehow survived centuries of storms and sieges. He knelt before the heart tree, an ancient oak, whose red leaves rustled in the sea breeze. "What should I do?" he whispered to the old gods. Though he had never been particularly devout. "I swore an oath to Stannis, but is an oath to a king who has lost his way still binding? What does honor demand when honor itself is in question?" The wind through the leaves seemed to whisper an answer, though perhaps it was only his own conscience speaking. "Serve justice, serve the realm, serve the king who deserves to rule." Davos rose from his knees. His decision made, he would not betray Stannis openly. That would be dishonorable. But neither would he continue to serve a cause he no longer believed in. He would find a way to extract himself from Stannis' service, and then he would see if Jon Snow had room in his army for an old smuggler who had finally learned the difference between a king and a true leader. In the great hall of Storm's End, Jon and Daenerys sat together at the high table, sharing a simple meal with their commanders and the castle's former garrison. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost festive, as former enemies broke bread together and shared stories of their homes and families. "The men seem to be integrating well," Daenerys observed, watching as northern soldiers laughed at jokes told by Stormlanders, while former slaves from Essos compared weapons with Westerosi knights. "They're good men," Jon agreed. "They served honorably, under difficult circumstances. They deserve respect for that." Ser Jorah approached their table, a scroll in his hand. "Your Grace, Your Majesty, reports from our scouts. Word of Storm's End's surrender is spreading quickly. Several minor houses have already sent ravens declaring for your cause." "How many?" Jon asked. "House One, House Dondarrion, House Selmy." Jorah read from the scroll. "Smaller houses too, Penrose's cousins, some landed knights, merchant families from the coastal towns. All told, perhaps another 2,000 swords if they honor their commitments. That brings our total to what, 42,000? 43? You're approaching the size of army that conquered the Seven Kingdoms in the first place." "Numbers aren't everything," Jon said quietly. "But they help." Daenerys reached over to cover his hand with hers, a gesture that had become natural over the past few days. "What matters is that we're building something real here. Not just an army, but a movement. People are choosing to follow us because they believe in what we represent." "And what do we represent?" Jon asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Hope," Daenerys replied simply. "Justice. The promise that things can be better than they are." Lord Connington, who had been quietly observing the integration of the former garrison, spoke up. "Storm's End was always the key to the Stormlands. With this castle in our hands, the rest of the region will follow. The question becomes, where do we strike next?" Jon was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes distant. "North," he said finally. "It's time to reunite with my family. My father and brother have been fighting the Lannisters in the Riverlands long enough. With our combined forces, we'll be unstoppable," Daenerys finished, her voice carrying quiet confidence. Outside, the sound of dragons could be heard. Illyrian's deep roar, answered by the higher calls of Rida, Viserion and Rhaegal. The great beasts had claimed the castle's highest towers as their roosts, their presence a constant reminder of the power that now resided within Storm's End's ancient walls. "Tomorrow we begin preparations for the march north," Jon announced to the assembled company. "But tonight, we celebrate. We celebrate victory without unnecessary bloodshed. We celebrate new allies and old friends, and we celebrate the growing strength of our cause." Cups were raised throughout the hall. voices joining in a toast that echoed off the ancient stones. But as the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Jon and Daenerys found themselves drawn to a quiet alcove overlooking the sea. "It's beautiful," Daenerys said softly, watching the moonlight dance on the waves far below. "I can see why the Baratheons chose this place for their seat. There's something eternal about it." Jon nodded, his arm around her waist, as they stood together in the cool night air. "My father always said that the best castles are the ones that feel like home, even when you've never lived there. Storm's End feels like that." "Home?" Daenerys repeated, the word carrying weight. "I've never really had one of those. Dragonstone was my birthplace, but I barely remember it. The house with the red door in Braavos was the closest thing, but even that was temporary." She turned in his arms, her violet eyes reflecting the moonlight. "But this, being here with you, building something together, this feels like it could be home." Jon's heart swelled with emotion as he looked down at her. "Wherever we are together," he said softly, "that's home." "I love you," Daenerys whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. "I love you too," Jon replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." They stood together in comfortable silence, holding each other close as the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new tests of their resolve. But tonight, they had each other, and they had hope. The Tower of the Hand had never felt more like a prison than it did on this gray morning, as Tywin Lannister stood before the great window overlooking King's Landing. The city sprawled below him, a maze of streets and hovels that reeked of unwashed bodies and desperation, but his mind was focused on matters far beyond the capital's walls. Ravens had brought troubling news throughout the night. Storm's End had fallen, the Stormlands were rallying to the bastard king's banner, and Jon Snow's army now numbered over 40,000 strong. 42,000, Tywin thought grimly, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, and growing by the day. The door to his solar opened without ceremony, admitting his daughter Cersei. The Queen Regent swept into the room with her usual imperious bearing, her golden hair gleaming in the morning light, but Tywin could see the tension in her green eyes, the tight line of her mouth that spoke of barely controlled panic. "Father," she began without preamble, "we must discuss this bastard pretender and his dragon whore. The reports from Storm's End—" "I am well aware of the reports," Tywin interrupted, his voice cold as winter steel. "Jon Snow has taken Storm's End without a siege, turned their garrison to his cause, and added another 2,000 swords to his army. The Stormlands are falling like dominoes, each house seeking to curry favor with what they perceive as the winning side." Cersei's face flushed with anger. "Then we must act, send our armies south, crush this rebellion before it grows any stronger. Every day we delay gives him more time to what?" Tywin turned from the window, his pale green eyes fixing on his daughter with the intensity of a hunting cat. "To continue doing exactly what he has been doing since he landed in Westeros. Winning battles, gaining allies, inspiring loyalty in men who should by all rights despise him." The hand of the king moved to his desk, where maps of the Seven Kingdoms lay spread across the polished wood, marked with colored pins showing troop movements and territorial control. Red for Lannister holdings, which seemed to shrink with each passing day. Blue for the bastard king's forces, spreading like a plague across the Stormlands and beyond. "We cannot match him in open battle," Tywin continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone he had used when Cersei was a child. "His army is larger, better equipped, and most importantly, motivated by something more than fear or gold. They believe in their cause, in their king. Men who fight for belief are far more dangerous than men who fight for coin." "Then what do you propose?" Cersei demanded, her voice rising with frustration. "That we simply surrender. Hand over the Iron Throne to some bastard and his foreign queen." Tywin's smile was thin and cold. "I propose that we remind the Seven Kingdoms why the name Lannister is feared. If we cannot defeat Jon Snow through conventional warfare, then we must make the cost of supporting him too high to bear." He moved to a side table where a raven perched in a cage, a scroll already tied to its leg. "I have already sent word to Septal Grekel Clegane. The Mountain and his men are to intensify their raids in the Riverlands. Every village that has declared for the bastard king, every lord who has sent men to join Robb Stark's forces, they will burn." Cersei's eyes lit up with cruel satisfaction. "Make them pay for their defiance." "Precisely," Tywin released the raven, watching it wing its way north through the window. Let Jon Snow and his followers see what their rebellion costs the innocent. Let them choose between their cause and the lives of countless small folk. The hand turned back to his daughter, his expression grim. War is not just about armies and battles. Cersei, it is about will. The will to continue fighting when the cost becomes unbearable. We may not be able to break Jon Snow's army, but we can break the spirit of those who support him. In the Riverlands, the morning mist clung to the banks of the Trident like a funeral shroud. Sir Gregor Clegane, called the Mountain That Rides, sat astride his massive destrier at the edge of a small village whose name he had never bothered to learn. Behind him, 300 mounted men waited in silence, their faces hidden beneath steel helms, their hands resting on sword hilts. The village was peaceful in the early dawn, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of a blacksmith's hammer ringing across the water. Children's laughter echoing from the common green. It was the kind of place that existed in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, where simple folk lived simple lives, caring little for the games of kings and queens. Sir Gregor, one of his lieutenants, said quietly, "The scouts report no soldiers here, just farmers and craftsmen. Their lord declared for the Stark boy, but there are no fighting men left. They've all marched south to join Robb Stark's army." The Mountain's voice was a low rumble when he spoke. Then they chose their side. Lord Tywin's orders were clear. Make them pay for their defiance. Show the realm what happens to those who support the bastard king and his rebellion. He raised his massive sword, the steel gleaming in the morning light. Burn it all. Kill anyone who resists. Leave enough survivors to spread word of what happened here, but make sure they understand the price of treason. The riders spurred their horses forward, thundering down the hillside toward the unsuspecting village. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. Buildings put to the torch, livestock slaughtered, granaries burned to deny food to any passing armies. The screams of the innocent echoed across the countryside, a message written in blood and smoke. By midday, the village was nothing but ash and ruin. The Mountain and his men rode on to their next target, leaving behind only devastation and the bitter knowledge that this was just the beginning. 3 days later, similar scenes played out across the Riverlands. Village after village burned, their only crime being ruled by lords who had declared for Jon Snow or sent men to fight alongside Robb Stark. The Mountain's raids were systematic, brutal, and effective. Within a week, the countryside was in chaos, refugees streaming toward whatever safety they could find. In his camp along the Green Fork, Robb Stark, who has recently arrived back to battlefield, received the reports with growing horror and rage. The young wolf had grown into his role as a military commander over the months of warfare. His boyish features hardened by the responsibilities of command, but nothing had prepared him for the systematic brutality of Tywin's response. "How many villages?" he asked his maester, his voice tight with controlled fury. 17 confirmed, my lord," the old man replied, his hands shaking as he consulted his notes. "Perhaps more that we haven't heard from yet. Thousands dead, tens of thousands displaced. The Mountain shows no mercy to anyone. Men, women, children, the elderly, all are fair targets in his eyes." Robb's fist slammed down on the table before him, making the maps and wine cups jump. "This is not warfare. This is butchery. Tywin Lannister seeks to break our will by murdering innocents. And it may work," Lord Rickard Karstark said grimly from his position near the tent's entrance. "Already some of our bannermen are wavering. They see their lands burning, their people dying, and they begin to question whether this war is worth the cost." "Then what would you have me do?" Robb demanded, his blue eyes blazing with Stark fury. "Abandon the fight? Let the Lannisters rule through terror and intimidation?" Before anyone could answer, a commotion outside the tent drew their attention. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered with sweat, his clothes bearing the dust of hard travel. Robb recognized him immediately. One of his father's men bearing the dire wolf of House Stark. "My lord," the messenger gasped, dropping to one knee. "Word from Lord Eddard. He bids you withdraw your forces to a more defensible position. King Jon approaches from the south with a great host, over 40,000 strong, with dragons and siege engines. He means to unite your armies and strike at the heart of Lannister power." The tent fell silent as the implications sank in. Robb's face showed a mixture of relief and something that might have been disappointment. Relief that his half-brother was coming to their aid, but perhaps disappointment that he would no longer be the sole commander of northern forces. "How long until he arrives?" Robb asked. "A fortnight, perhaps less, if the weather holds," the messenger replied. "Lord Eddard asks that you consolidate your position and avoid any major engagements until the king arrives." Robb was quiet for a long moment, studying the map spread before him. Finally, he nodded. "Send word to all our commanders. We withdraw to Riverrun. Let Tywin think his terror tactics have worked. When Jon arrives, we'll show him the true meaning of northern justice." Far to the south, in the waters of Blackwater Bay, a different kind of warfare was unfolding. The morning sun glinted off the sails of two fleets as they maneuvered for position, the Golden Lions of House Lannister facing off against the mixed banners of Jon Snow's naval forces. Admiral Arya Waters stood on the deck of his flagship, the King's Landing, his weathered face grim as he studied the enemy formation through his spyglass. The bastard King's fleet was an odd mixture. Ships from the free cities with their exotic designs, vessels captured from slavers and pirates, and a handful of war galleys that bore the distinctive craftsmanship of Quhor's shipwrights. 37 ships, his first mate reported. Mix of galleys and cogs, but they look well armed. Those Quhoric vessels, especially. I can see the glint of steel on their rams and catapults. Waters nodded grimly. His own fleet numbered 42 ships, but many were older vessels pressed into service from merchant families and minor lords. The enemy might be outnumbered, but their ships looked purpose-built for war. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "Attack formation. We'll try to break their line before they can bring those siege engines to bear." The battle that followed was fierce, but brief. The Lannister fleet had numbers, but Jon's naval forces had something more valuable: experience. Many of the crews were former pirates and sellsouls who had learned their trade in the brutal waters of Slaver's Bay, where mercy was a luxury no captain could afford. The Ygritta's Fury, a sleek war galley built in the forges of Quhor, smashed through the Lannister line, like a spear through silk. Her bronze ram tore through the hull of the Lannister cog, sending it to the bottom in minutes. Around her, other ships of Jon's fleet pressed their attack with ruthless efficiency. But it was the dragons that truly turned the tide. Balerion and Ygritte, who arrived for help with Jon, descended from the clouds like living nightmares, their massive forms casting shadows across the water. The great black dragon's wingspan stretched nearly 100 feet, his roar echoing across the bay as he dove toward the Lannister flagship. Admiral Waters had faced storms and pirates, rebels and raiders, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of a dragon bearing down on his ship. Balerion's flames turned the King's Landing sails to ash in seconds, her crew leaping overboard to escape the inferno. Ygritte, smaller but no less deadly, targeted the Lannister supply ships, her silver scales gleaming as she breathed fire across their decks. Within an hour, half of Tywin's fleet was burning or sunk, the survivors fleeing toward the safety of King's Landing's harbor. From the deck of his flagship, Jon Snow watched the battle's conclusion with grim satisfaction. The sea around them was littered with debris and bodies, the water stained red with blood. It was not a sight he took pleasure in, but it was a necessary victory. "The supply lines are secure," Ser Jorah reported, approaching with a scroll in his hand. "Our ships can now move freely between Essos and Westeros. The forges of Quhor continue to send us weapons and armor, and the free cities have pledged more ships if we need them." Jon nodded, his gray eyes fixed on the distant walls of King's Landing. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get when we march north to join my father and brother." Beside him, Daenerys placed a gentle hand on his arm. The young queen wore practical sailing clothes, her silver hair braided back to keep it from the sea wind, but she still wore the simple crown that marked her royal status. "Your dragons fought well," she said softly, her voice meant for his ears alone. "Our dragons," he corrected, his gray eyes meeting her. "Vassarion and Rhaegal follow you as much as they follow me now. They sense the bond between us." Daenerys felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Their relationship was still new, still growing, but it felt as natural as breathing. The love between them was evident to anyone who cared to look in the way they stood close together without thinking. In the way their eyes sought each other across crowded rooms, in the gentle touches that spoke of deep affection. "When we reach the Riverlands," Jon said quietly, "you'll meet my father and brother. I want them to see what I see when I look at you." "And what is that?" Daenerys asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "The woman I love," Jon replied simply. "The queen who will help me build a better world." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by a shout from the crow's nest. Ships on the horizon. Flying Stark banners. Jon and Daenerys moved to the ship's rail, straining to see the approaching vessels. As they drew closer, Jon could make out the direwolf banners of House Stark, and his heart leaped with recognition. "It's my father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's come to meet us. Though I wonder when he built a flagship this big, as Starks do not have a great navy power. Maybe House Manderly had granted their..." The reunion that followed was everything Jon had hoped for, and more. Lord Eddard Stark stood on the deck of his flagship, his face bearing new lines of weariness and worry, but his gray eyes bright with joy as he saw his bastard son approaching. "Jon," Ned said simply as they embraced, and in that single word was all the love and pride a father could feel for his child. "Father," Jon replied, his voice breaking slightly, "I've missed you." When they finally separated, Ned's eyes moved to Daenerys, who stood respectfully nearby. Jon took her hand, drawing her forward. "Father, I want you to meet Daenerys Targaryen," Jon said formally. "My queen, my partner in this war," and he paused, his cheeks coloring slightly. "The woman I love." Ned studied the young queen for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking her measure. Finally, he inclined his head respectfully. "Your Grace," he said formally. "I have heard much about you, your courage, your compassion, your dedication to justice. Any woman who can inspire such devotion in my son has my respect." Daenerys curtsied gracefully. "Lord Stark, the honor is mine. Jon speaks of you constantly. Your wisdom, your honor, your love for your family. I hope to prove worthy of the trust you place in me." "You already have," Ned replied, his stern features softening into a rare smile. "I can see the way my son looks at you, and the way you look at him. That is worth more than any army or dragon." Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, Tyrion Lannister sat in his private chambers, a cup of wine in one hand and a letter in the other. The dwarf's sharp mind was working furiously as he read the reports from the Riverlands. His father's brutal tactics, the burning villages, the systematic slaughter of innocents. "This is madness," he thought grimly. "Father thinks he can break their will through terror, but all he's doing is proving that Jon Snow and his queen offer a better alternative." Tyrion set down the letter and moved to his window, looking out over the city below. King's Landing sprawled beneath him, a maze of poverty and desperation, held together by fear and tradition. But for how much longer? The reports from Storm's End had been troubling enough. A bloodless victory, enemy soldiers welcomed into Jon Snow's ranks, justice tempered with mercy. It painted a picture of a very different kind of ruler than the ones Tyrion had served all his life. A king who inspires rather than intimidates. A queen who protects rather than exploits. And together they're building something that might actually last. Tyrion poured himself another cup of wine, his mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. The war was far from over, but the momentum was clearly shifting. Jon Snow's army grew stronger with each victory, while the Lannister forces were stretched thin, relying increasingly on fear and brutality to maintain control. When this war ends, and it will end, there will be a reckoning. The question is whether House Lancel survives it. The dwarf moved to his desk, pulling out parchment and quill. He began to write carefully, crafting words that could be interpreted as loyal service to his family, while leaving room for alternative interpretations. It was a dangerous game he was beginning to play, but Tyrion Lannister had always been a gambling man, and right now the smart money was on the bastard king and his dragon queen. Let father play his games of terror and intimidation, Tyrion thought as he sealed the letter. I'll play a longer game, one that might just save House Lannister when the inevitable comes to pass. Outside his window, the sun was setting over King's Landing, painting the sky the color of blood and fire. In the distance, if one knew where to look, smoke could be seen rising from the Riverlands. The smoke of burning villages, of Tywin Lannister's message, written in ash and death. The Game of Thrones continued, but the players were changing, and change, Tyrion had learned long ago, was the only constant in the world of kings and queens.